The night the mountains turned silent, a wounded German shepherd ran through a blizzard with a child strapped to his back. Not wandering, not lost, sent. Moments later, a former Navy SEAL opened his cabin door and realized this wasn't a rescue. It was the beginning of a hunt. Beneath the snow lay a crushed SUV, scorch marks hidden under ice, and proof that the crash was never an accident. Somewhere in the dark, armed men were moving fast, erasing witnesses, silencing anyone who knew the truth. A family had survived the fall, but survival only made them targets. As the storm tightened its grip, the cabin became a battlefield. Bullets ripped through old timber. Bloodhounds closed in. A loyal dog, already wounded, threw himself between danger and a little girl who refused to let go of his neck. And just when hope thinned to seconds, the sky itself roared back. This is a story about loyalty that outruns fear, about courage found in the coldest night, and about how one small life can expose a buried truth meant to stay hidden forever. Before the story begins, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, please follow the channel for more stories of faith, courage, and miracles in the darkest storms. You can also comment Amen to send blessings to everyone listening. And stay with us until the very end. The storm arrived without ceremony, the way winter often did in the Sawtooth Mountains of Idaho, fast, merciless, and absolute. Snow swept sideways across the ridgeline, driven by wind that howled like a living thing clawing at the earth. In the middle of that whiteout, far from plowed roads and human noise, stood a single log cabin half buried under drifting snow. Inside the cabin, Jack Mercer sat at a scarred pine table, his back straight despite the long hours of stillness. At 38, Jack carried the kind of build that never quite softened, even in solitude. Broad shoulders filled out a worn thermal shirt, his frame lean but dense with muscle earned rather than maintained. His dark brown hair was cropped short, regulation short, a habit he'd never broken after leaving the Navy SEALs. A trimmed layer of stubble shadowed a jawline marked by a faint scar near the chin, an old souvenir from a mission he no longer spoke about. His eyes, a muted steel gray, moved constantly, not with anxiety, but with awareness. Stillness, for Jack, was not peace. It was vigilance. The cabin wasn't a retreat. It was a listening post. A rugged laptop hummed quietly beside him, its screen filled with scrolling data packets and frequency graphs. A high-gain antenna ran through the roof, braced against the storm. Jack wore a headset over one ear, listening to the low hiss of encrypted chatter bleeding through the static. Somewhere beyond the mountains, a network known as Cold Harbor was probing emergency systems, rerouting distress calls, intercepting medical alerts, siphoning personal data from elderly Americans who trusted that help would come when they needed it most. Jack's role was simple on paper. Listen, flag anomalies, stay invisible, no arrests, no heroics, just silence and patience. The wind slammed against the cabin shutters, rattling them hard enough to make the old hinges groan. Jack adjusted his posture and rolled his shoulders once, easing tension he didn't bother pretending wasn't there. He'd learned long ago that isolation didn't quiet memories. It only gave them space. Then he heard something that didn't belong. At first, it threaded itself through the storm so faintly that his brain tried to dismiss it. A sound too fragile to survive the wind. Jack froze, one hand hovering above the keyboard. He pulled the headset slightly away from his ear. There it was again. A bark. Not sharp, not territorial. Broken. Hoarse. The sound of lungs pushed beyond their limit. Jack was on his feet instantly. He grabbed a heavy canvas jacket from the hook by the door and slipped his boots on without tying them fully. The training never left you. Neither did the instinct. He moved with controlled urgency, every motion efficient, deliberate. When he opened the cabin door, the storm hit him like a physical blow. Snow blasted inward, stinging his face, stealing his breath. Visibility dropped to barely a few feet. The world outside was nothing but motion and noise. Wind, ice, darkness. Then something moved at the edge of the threshold. A large shape staggered forward and collapsed hard onto the wooden step. Jack dropped to one knee without thinking. The animal was a German shepherd, big and powerfully built, its black and tan coat crusted with ice and snow. Its sides heaved with shallow, ragged breaths. One hind leg dragged unnaturally, stained dark with half-frozen blood. But that wasn't what stopped Jack's breath. Strapped to the dog's back, secured with frayed strips of a seatbelt, was a child, a little girl, no more than 2 years old, curled against the dog's spine like she belonged there. Her small pink jacket was torn at the seams, her cheeks pale and tinged blue from cold. Frost clung to her eyelashes. One tiny hand was buried deep in the dog's fur, fingers locked in a grip that refused to let go even in unconsciousness. Jack didn't hesitate. He lifted the child first, cradling her against his chest, instinctively turning his body to shield her from the wind. She weighed almost nothing. That scared him more than anything else. Her breath fluttered weakly against his collarbone. "I've got you," he murmured, voice low and steady, meant as much for himself as for her. Inside the cabin, he laid her gently on the narrow cot near the stove. He stripped off her frozen outer layers, wrapped her in a thermal blanket, then added his own jacket on top. He checked her airway, pulse, pupils, movements smooth, practiced, born of battlefield medicine rather than hospitals. Her pulse was there, weak, but there, alive. Jack turned back to the door. The shepherd lay just inside now, having dragged itself over the threshold before collapsing again. Up close, the dog was enormous, easily 80 pounds, chest broad, muscles dense beneath the soaked fur. Despite the pain, its head lifted when Jack approached. Its eyes, a deep amber brown, locked onto Jack's with startling clarity. There was no panic in them, only urgency. "Easy, boy," Jack said, kneeling. He cut away fur around the wound, cleaned it with warmed water and antiseptic, then wrapped the leg tightly. The dog didn't whimper. It endured in silence, watching the child with unwavering focus. That was when Jack understood something was wrong. This dog wasn't lost. Lost dogs panicked. They bolted. They whimpered. This one had navigated miles of mountainous terrain in a whiteout, injured, carrying a child secured with deliberate care. That didn't happen by accident. The fire crackled as Jack fed the stove, heat slowly pushing back the cold. Minutes stretched into an hour as he monitored breathing, adjusted blankets, and waited. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the cabin, something fragile began to stabilize. The child stirred once, letting out a soft, brittle sound before sinking back into sleep. Color returned faintly to her cheeks. The dog finally lowered its head, exhaustion claiming it, but even then, one eye remained half open, alert. Jack sat back on his heels, heart beating slower now, heavier. He'd come to the mountains to listen for signals, to watch patterns, to stay unseen. Instead, something had found him, and whatever had driven a trained dog to carry a child through a blizzard was still out there, buried beneath the snow, unfinished. Jack Mercer had learned many things in his life. One of them was this: when something like this arrived at your door, it wasn't asking for shelter. It was asking for protection. Morning came thin and colorless, a washed-out gray pressing against the cabin windows, as if the storm had decided to linger just to watch. Jack Mercer hadn't slept. He sat on the edge of the cot, boots on, eyes moving between the child and the dog, the way a sentry watches 2 doors at once. The fire had burned low through the night, steady enough to keep frost from reclaiming the room. Outside, the wind had softened, but the mountains still breathed cold. The little girl stirred first. Her eyelids fluttered, lashes damp and clumped where ice had melted and refrozen. She made a small sound, half breath, half whisper. Jack leaned closer, lowering his voice as if loud words might shatter her. Her eyes opened, unfocused, then fixed briefly on his face before drifting again. "Car," she said, the word thin and cracked. A pause. "Cliff." Another pause, Longer this time, and then with a tremble that tightened Jack's chest. "Mom." He nodded as if she could see him, as if agreement mattered. "You're safe," he said. He needed a name, something simple, grounding. "Lily," he added, testing it softly. "You're safe, Lily." The child didn't respond, but her breathing evened, and she slept again, fingers curled in the blanket like they were holding on to something invisible. Behind him, the German shepherd pushed himself upright with a low, controlled grunt. He moved stiffly, favoring the bandaged leg, but the pain did nothing to dull his intent. The dog paced a narrow path from the door to the window and back again, nose lifting to the air, ears angling toward the trees. His coat had dried in uneven waves, black along the spine, tan at the legs and muzzle, thick fur still matted where ice had been. He stopped at the window and growled, a low vibration that never rose to a bark. When Jack knelt beside him, he noticed the collar for the first time. Worn leather, scuffed and darkened with age. A metal tag caught the firelight. "Duke." "Duke," Jack said quietly. The dog flicked an ear, eyes never leaving the tree line. 5, maybe 6 years old, Jack guessed. Big, trained. There was nothing feral about him. This was a working animal, disciplined and focused, and whatever had brought him here had not ended at the cabin door. Jack reached for the handheld radio on the table. There was one person close enough, capable enough, and stubborn enough to answer in this weather. "Brooks," he said into the mic, keeping his voice level. "This is Mercer. Do you copy?" Static stretched the silence, then broke. "Copy," came the reply, clear enough to cut through the hiss. "You sound like hell, Jack." Maya Brooks arrived 90 minutes later, hiking up the last ridge with the economy of someone who knew how to ration breath. She was 32, tall and lean, her build shaped by long days in rough terrain rather than gyms. Her dark hair was pulled into a practical braid that brushed the collar of her forest green rescue jacket, dusted white with snow. Her skin held a warm, weathered tone, cheeks flushed from the climb, and her eyes, deep brown, steady, took in the cabin in one practiced sweep. She had been an Army medic before joining search and rescue, and it showed in the way she moved. Calm, precise, no wasted motion. She knelt beside Lily without ceremony, checking temperature, pulse, color. "Hypothermia, mild to moderate," she said. "She's a fighter." She glanced at Jack. "So are you." Duke limped closer, watching her hands. Maya gave him a brief, assessing look. "And you must be the hero," she murmured, fingers light as she inspected the bandage. "Clean work. He'll walk, but he shouldn't." Duke's tail thumped once, then stilled as he turned back to the window, muscles coiled. "That's the problem," Jack said. "He won't stop." Maya followed his gaze. "He's guarding," she said, "or tracking." They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the cabin settle, the distant creak of snow-laden trees. Jack told her what Lily had whispered. He told her about the straps, the deliberate way the child had been secured to the dog's back. Maya's jaw tightened. "Someone made a choice," she said. "They sent her." Jack nodded. He was already pulling on his outer layers. "I'm going back." Maya didn't argue. She never did when she saw that look. "I'll stay," she said. "I'll keep her warm, keep the radio on, 10-minute check-ins." She hesitated, then added, "Jack, don't turn this into something you can't walk away from." He met her eyes. "I don't think that's up to me." Outside, Duke moved with renewed purpose, nose low, breath steaming. He took the lead immediately, angling downslope through drifts that swallowed Jack's boots to the shin. The storm had eased enough to reveal shapes again, dark pines hunched under white, the land folding into itself. Duke slowed at times, sniffing, circling, then choosing a line with certainty. Jack followed, scanning, counting steps, letting the dog do what he had been trained to do. The ravine opened abruptly, a scar cut into the mountainside. At the bottom lay the SUV, twisted and broken, half buried under snow and shattered branches. Jack stopped at the edge, heart steady, mind already sorting details. This wasn't a simple slide. He descended carefully, boots biting into ice. Up close, the damage told a different story. The undercarriage bore tight scorch marks, controlled and precise. Not chaos. Intent. Inside the wreck, a child's car seat lay torn free. A pink mitten was wedged beneath the console. Jack's eyes followed a thin trail of blood leading away from the passenger side. He knelt, brushing snow aside. The seatbelt strap was frayed, not cut by metal but gnawed through. Teeth marks. Duke had pulled her out. "Good boy," Jack breathed. Duke moved again, this time stopping short, ears pricked. Jack followed, his line of sight, and saw the boot prints. 3 sets, deep and recent, leading into the trees. Too heavy for hikers, too organized for panic. Voices drifted faintly, carried by the cold, and Duke's growl deepened. Jack slid behind a fallen trunk just as 3 figures emerged near the wreck. They wore dark insulated jackets, faces half-covered, rifles slung with casual confidence. The tall one moved like he knew how to clear a room. The shorter one's eyes darted, nervous energy leaking from every step. The third bore a scar that cut diagonally across his face, pale against weathered skin. "Tracks say the kid made it out," the tall one said. "Boss wants it clean." Duke tensed, muscles trembling, ready to spring. Jack's hand tightened on the rifle as the men fanned out, closing the distance. Snow crunched under their boots, deliberate and sure. Jack breathed once, slow and controlled as the forest seemed to hold its breath with him. Then Duke lunged forward, barking sharp and urgent, and the first man turned toward the sound. Too fast, too close. Hannah fell hard just beyond the barn, her boots skidding on a thin sheet of ice she hadn't seen beneath the snow. The sound was sharp and ugly, a quick cry cut short as she hit the ground. Cole was there in seconds, dropping the feed bucket and sliding the last few feet on his knees. Hannah lay twisted on her side, teeth clenched, one gloved hand digging into the frozen earth. She was small-framed, early 30s, with chestnut-brown hair usually tied back in a practical knot that never quite held. Her skin was pale from too many months on the run and not enough sleep, and when pain hit her, it showed plainly in her eyes, hazel, expressive, unguarded. She tried to laugh it off, because that was what she always did, but when she moved her ankle, the laugh cracked into a hiss. Cole didn't need medical training to see it was bad. Swelling came fast, ugly and uneven. He carried her inside without asking. Cole Bennett was built like someone who had worked with his hands most of his life, tall, broad through the shoulders, forearms thick with old scars and sun-darkened skin. His beard was rough and untrimmed, the kind men grow when mirrors stop mattering, and his hair had gone more gray than he liked to admit since leaving the Army 5 years earlier. He rarely spoke unless there was a reason. People mistook that for coldness, but it came from something else. A life that had taught him words didn't stop bad things from happening. Hannah protested weakly as he set her on the couch, but she didn't fight him. When he wrapped her ankle and eased it onto a stack of pillows, she finally exhaled, long and shaky. "I'm sorry," she said, the words automatic. "I didn't mean to." "Stop," Cole said, not unkindly. "You're hurt. That's all." That was when reality landed, heavy and unavoidable. Hannah had 3 kids, 3 very small kids, and for the first time since she'd arrived at Cole's isolated property weeks earlier, she couldn't chase them, lift them, or outrun their chaos. Cole stood in the kitchen doorway, hands on his hips, watching the situation unfold like an ambush he hadn't trained for. The twins, 4-year-olds with endless energy and mismatched socks, were already arguing over a wooden train. The baby wailed from a crib in the corner room. And in the middle of it all stood Diesel. Diesel was a 2-year-old German shepherd with oversized paws and a black and tan coat that never stayed clean for more than 5 minutes. He had been a working prospect once, bred for drive and intelligence. But now he was something else entirely, a loyal, chaotic shadow who believed every problem could be solved by carrying it in his mouth. He watched Cole with bright amber eyes, head tilted, tail swishing, as if this were all a game designed for him. Cole lost the first battle to oatmeal. It burned onto the pot while he tried to stop one twin from climbing the counter and the other from dumping sugar straight into the bowl. The baby's cries escalated into a siren that made his shoulders tense the way they used to when mortars landed too close. Diesel seized the moment to grab a diaper and sprint through the living room, proud as a parade marshal, the white fabric flapping from his jaws like a victory flag. "Diesel," Cole growled. The dog skidded on the rug, turned and bolted again, nails clicking, ears back in pure delight. Hannah watched from the couch, ankle throbbing, and then she laughed. It surprised both of them. The sound came out soft at first, then stronger, until tears slipped down her cheeks. The twins froze, startled, then joined in, laughing because she was laughing. Even the baby quieted, hiccuping himself into silence. Cole stood there, holding a spoon in one hand and a bottle in the other. Oatmeal splattered on his shirt, a diaperless dog circling his legs, and something in his chest loosened. It wasn't happiness. Not exactly. It was relief, the kind that came when tension you'd carried for years finally eased its grip, just a fraction. That night, after the kids were asleep and the house had settled into creaks and wind noise, Hannah spoke. She sat with her ankle elevated, fingers wrapped around a chipped mug of tea. Cole leaned against the counter, listening without interrupting, the way he always did. "My husband's name was Caleb Crowley," she said. "He was an electrician, union work. Good man." Her voice steadied as she talked, but her hands trembled. "He died on a job site. They said it was an accident, a fall, faulty rigging." She swallowed. "After the funeral, a man came to see me. Silas Grady." The name sat heavy between them. Hannah described him in short, careful strokes, mid-40s, sharp features, hair always slicked back, eyes that never stopped measuring. A man who smiled without warmth. Silas Grady, she said, claimed Caleb had taken on a private debt, signed papers to cover someone else's mess. Hannah didn't even know who the debt was for. She only knew the number was impossible, and the threats came quietly at first, then louder. Notes, phone calls, men asking questions at her work. "I ran because I didn't have a choice," she said. "Because when he started asking about the kids, I knew it wasn't just money anymore." Cole said nothing, but his jaw tightened. He knew men like Grady. He'd met them overseas and at home. Different suits, same hunger. The knock came later, sharp and sudden, not on the door, on the radio. Marisol Reyes's voice cut through the static, urgent and low. Marisol was a county outreach worker who'd helped Hannah months ago, a woman in her 40s with cropped black hair and eyes that missed nothing. She'd seen too much to be easily rattled, which made the edge in her voice stand out. "Cole," she said, "they're asking questions. A man matching Grady's description. He's been through 3 towns. Someone saw your truck." Cole crossed the room and looked out the window. Snow fell thick and silent. Then headlights flared at the gate. A pickup engine idled, low and patient. Diesel's ears snapped upright. The dog moved to the door, body stiff, a low warning rumble building in his chest. Cole reached for the light switch, then stopped. He didn't turn it on. He didn't reach for the door either. Outside, the engine cut, and someone stepped out into the snow. Duke led Jack into a stand of pines so dense the light thinned to a dim green haze. The forest closed in, sound swallowed by snow-laden branches and the hush that followed pursuit. The dog slowed, nostrils flaring, then angled toward a low rise where the ground dipped and rose again like a shallow breath. There, half hidden by drifted snow and wind-bent saplings, stood an abandoned ranger cabin. Its roof sagged under winters it had outlived, cedar shingles darkened with age. The windows were clouded with frost, and the door hung slightly crooked, the hinges whispering when Duke nosed it open. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and cold ash. Jack moved first, rifle low, eyes scanning. The cabin was single-roomed, spare and narrow, with a cast-iron stove bolted near the wall and a rough table scarred by decades of use. Duke paused near the far corner, tail stiff, then looked back at Jack and whined once, a small sound, urgent and precise. Jack followed the dog's gaze to a patch of floorboards darker than the rest. "Easy," Jack whispered. A man's voice answered from below, hoarse and controlled. "We're not armed." Jack crouched and pried up the loose board. Beneath it was a narrow cellar, no more than a crawl space, the kind built to store firewood and keep it dry. 2 figures huddled there, wrapped in layers of stiff, ice-crusted clothing. They looked up, eyes reflecting the lantern's thin light like animals caught between fear and hope. The man rose first with effort. Ethan Parker was 41, broad through the chest despite the way pain folded him inward. Sandy brown hair clung to his forehead, damp with sweat. His jaw was square, shadowed by uneven stubble, and his pale blue eyes stayed alert even as his breath came shallow. Years in system security had taught him to read patterns and anticipate threats. It showed in the way he studied Jack, measuring, calibrating. A fractured rib made itself known every time he shifted, but he refused to let it slow his words. "My wife," he said, nodding to the woman beside him. "Claire." Claire Parker was 36, slighter than Ethan, with dark blonde hair tangled loose around her face like brittle straw. Her skin was pale with shock, freckles dusting her cheeks beneath streaks of dirt and dried blood. One shoulder sat lower than the other in a way Jack recognized instantly: dislocation. Her eyes were gray-green and steady, the kind that belonged to someone used to numbers and truth, to balancing ledgers that told stories people hoped would stay buried. Even injured, she carried herself with quiet resolve. Duke padded to the edge of the cellar and sat, eyes fixed on Claire. She reached up with trembling fingers and touched his muzzle. "Thank you," she whispered. The dog leaned into the contact, then looked back at Jack as if to say, "Now." Jack worked quickly. He relocated Claire's shoulder with practiced care. She bit down hard, breathing through it. No scream. Wasted. He wrapped Ethan's torso with a compression bandage, easing the worst of the pain so he could stand. Heat packs followed, then sips of warm water rationed carefully. Outside, the wind stirred, but the forest remained watchful. They didn't have time. Ethan spoke while Jack listened and worked. "We were auditors," Claire said, her voice steadier than her hands. "Northbridge Care Services. On paper, elder care. In reality—" "A siphon," Ethan finished. "Cold Harbor built the back end. Fake billing. Hospice claims for people still alive. Equipment charged to seniors who died years ago." He swallowed. "And when someone tried to call for help, the call didn't go through." Jack's eyes lifted. "Emergency rerouting." Claire nodded. "Selective interference. If you couldn't report, you couldn't be counted. The numbers stayed clean." Her jaw set. "We gathered proof. Too much proof." They'd handed it to the FBI. A quiet transport had been arranged. No stops, no gas. But someone inside the system had known the route. The device under the SUV hadn't been meant to vaporize them, just to send the car into a place where winter would finish the job. Duke had pulled Lily free. Ethan and Claire had crawled, dragged themselves uphill until their hands bled, and hidden. Jack closed the hatch. The story fit the patterns he'd been hearing through static for weeks. It fit too well. He moved immediately, turning the cabin into something else. Fishing line braided with scavenged metal and old sleigh bells became perimeter alarms, strung low between trees where a careless boot would sing. Firewood stacked against windows thickened the walls. Loose stone filled gaps. Snow was brushed smooth to erase their arrival. He guided Ethan and Claire back into the cellar, arranging blankets and a lantern turned low. "Stay," Jack said. "No sound." They nodded. Claire squeezed his forearm. "If anything happens—" "Nothing's happening," Jack replied. He meant it. Duke took position by the door, muscles taut despite the injury, amber eyes reflecting the lantern's glow. Jack clicked the light off. Darkness settled like a held breath. Night came fully, deep and starless. Then the sound cut through it. A bay, low and vibrating, not a wolf's howl, but a trained bloodhound's call. Another answered, then another. Duke's growl answered back, a warning that rattled the door. Jack moved to cover as shapes flowed between the trees. More men than before, 20, maybe more, spreading with discipline. 3 handlers led them, each gripping a leash attached to a dog bred for cold tracking. The lead handler was broad-chested, shaved head gleaming faintly under moonless sky, a thick red beard framing a mouth that smiled too easily. His eyes were washed-out green, predatory and patient. A faded tattoo of a rattlesnake coiled up his neck. He moved like someone who'd hunted people before and liked it. The attack came fast. Gunfire shredded the cabin's front wall. Wood splintered. Jack returned controlled bursts, moving from cover to cover, never staying long. Duke lunged when a man tried to flank, teeth finding fabric and arm before Jack fired and forced the retreat. A grenade rolled under the log wall. "Down!" Jack shouted, grabbing Duke and diving behind Stone. The blast tore the side open. Pain flashed white along Jack's ribs as shrapnel bit deep. He tasted iron and forced himself upright, pistol in hand, breath steady by will alone. The men surged, emboldened. Boots pounded snow, shadows stretched through the wrecked wall. Then the night broke open. Rotors thundered overhead. Spotlights carved the forest into stark white columns. A voice boomed, amplified and absolute. "Drop your weapons. Federal response." Panic rippled through the attackers. Some ran, some fired wild shots at the sky. Ropes fell. Dark figures descended with precision. In minutes, the forest was locked down. Inside the shattered cabin, medics rushed Jack. He kept one hand on Duke, who slumped beside him, wounded but breathing. The cellar hatch creaked. Claire and Ethan emerged, shaking, alive. Jack exhaled once long and slow as the lights burned bright and the night finally released its hold. Night fell hard over the Sawtooth Mountains, not gradually, but like a door slammed shut. The temperature dropped fast, turning breath into white ghosts and blood into something thick and stubborn. Inside the ranger cabin, Jack Hayes crouched behind a barricade of stacked logs and loose stone, his rifle angled toward the shattered doorway. His ribs burned with every inhale, the kind of pain that didn't fade but sharpened, demanding attention he refused to give. Years of combat had taught him how to compartmentalize suffering. Pain could wait. People could not. Duke stood beside him, legs braced wide despite the injury to his shoulder. The German shepherd's black and tan coat was darkened with blood and melted snow, his muscles trembling not from fear, but from readiness. At 5 or 6 years old, Duke had the build of a working dog bred for endurance. Broad chest, thick neck, powerful hindquarters, and eyes that missed nothing. His ears flicked constantly, tracking sound through the chaos outside. Every low growl that rolled out of him was a warning measured and deliberate. Beyond the cabin walls, movement rippled through the trees. Jack counted shapes by sound and shadow. Too many boots, too coordinated. They had returned with reinforcements. This time they came prepared. Flashlights cut through the darkness in disciplined sweeps. Somewhere to the south, a device chirped faintly. Electronic. Precise. Trackers. A bay echoed through the forest, long and vibrating. Then another. Bloodhounds. Duke stiffened, hackles rising, answering with a deep snarl that vibrated through his chest. Jack felt the weight of the moment settle in. This was the push, the end of running. Gunfire erupted without warning. Bullets punched into the cabin's outer wall, tearing through old timber and sending splinters screaming across the room. Jack rolled to his left, firing short, controlled bursts through the opening he'd carved earlier. He wasn't trying to kill, he was buying seconds. Outside, men shouted orders. Tight, practiced commands passed hand to hand. Duke moved before Jack could stop him. A figure rushed the broken window, weapon raised. Duke launched himself forward with a snarl, teeth finding fabric and forearm. The man screamed, weapon clattering to the snow. Jack fired once, clean and precise, forcing the others back. Duke staggered on the landing, a bullet grazing his shoulder, but he stayed upright, placing himself between the attackers and the door without hesitation. "Stay with me," Jack growled, grabbing the dog's harness and pulling him back into cover. Duke resisted only long enough to ensure the threat had retreated, then pressed close, chest heaving. A metallic clink cut through the gunfire. Jack's training screamed the word before his brain caught up. "Grenade!" He lunged, dragging Duke down behind the thickest section of stone. The explosion tore through the sidewall, ripping the cabin open like a wound. Heat slammed into Jack's ribs as fragments of wood and metal embedded deep. His vision whited out for half a second, breath driven from his lungs. When sound returned, it came muffled, distant, like he was underwater. The attackers surged, emboldened by the damage. Jack's rifle clicked dry. He dropped it without thinking and drew his sidearm, bracing himself against the wall. His hands shook, not from fear, but blood loss. Duke planted himself against Jack's leg, snarling at the shadows moving closer. 3 minutes, Jack whispered through clenched teeth. He didn't know if that was true. He needed it to be. Boots crunched just beyond the doorway. A silhouette filled the opening, broad-shouldered, confident. Duke exploded forward again, slamming into the man's knee and sending him sprawling. Jack fired twice, forcing the rest to scatter. His magazine ran low. Outside, men shouted, regrouped, pushed again. Then the sound came. At first, Jack thought it was thunder. Deep, rhythmic, impossible. The ground vibrated. Snow shook loose from branches. Rotors. A roar tore across the sky, growing louder by the second. Blinding light flooded the clearing as a helicopter dropped low, spotlights carving the forest into harsh white columns. A voice boomed from above, amplified and absolute. "Drop your weapons! Federal response!" Panic rippled through the attackers. Some fired wildly at the sky, others bolted into the trees. Ropes dropped. Dark figures descended with terrifying precision, helmets, rifles, discipline embodied. Within minutes, the fight was over. Men were pinned to the snow, weapons kicked aside, hands zip-tied behind their backs. Jack slumped against the wall, strength finally leaving him. Medics rushed in, one of them a woman with short dark hair and sharp eyes. Lieutenant Karen Mills, mid-30s, calm under pressure, her movements efficient as she pressed bandages to Jack's side and checked Duke's wounds with equal care. Outside, another figure appeared through the chaos. Maya Brooks moved toward the helicopter, bundled in her rescue jacket, Lily held tight against her chest. Maya's face was streaked with soot and snow, but her eyes were steady. When she reached the open clearing, she knelt and lowered Lily to the ground. The little girl saw Duke first. She broke free of Maya's hands and ran, unsteady, determined, straight into the dog's chest. Duke lowered himself carefully, wrapping his body around her as she clung to his neck. The helicopter's lights bathed them in white and gold, snow swirling like sparks around them. Lily laughed, a bright, ringing sound that cut through the wreckage and smoke. Jack watched from the stretcher as they loaded him, that image burning itself into his memory. Pain faded beneath something warmer. He had held the line long enough. Weeks later, the fallout spread fast. Cold Harbor collapsed under the weight of evidence. Servers seized, accounts frozen. The insider who planted the bomb was arrested, trying to flee the state. Families learned why help never came, and why it would now. Duke recovered fully. He was awarded a National Canine Valor Commendation, a small medal that hung awkwardly against his thick fur. He didn't seem to care. Jack did. Jack declined most interviews. He returned to the mountains, not to hide, but to breathe. Lily visited once, bundled in a red coat, clutching a crayon drawing of a cabin, a man, and a dog with a bright blue collar. As winter loosened its grip, Jack realized something had changed. Silence no longer felt empty. It felt earned. The longest night had passed, and what remained was light.